Okie doke. We'll go ahead and start. The Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, August 11th through 12th, represented some of the most evil ideologies in human history. You had white supremacists, you had neo-Nazis, you had neo-Confederates, you had people walking around with loaded semi-automatic weapons. You had people stepping forward with racist chants and slogans and posters. You even had someone from a far-right group drive their car into a group of protesters, killing one and injuring 19. Now, it goes without saying that the events in Charlottesville truly did matter, and it would make sense that any leader overseeing it would step forward with urgency and conviction and do their best to quell the situation. But in the United States of America, Donald Trump did nothing like that at all. And that's why I affirm the resolution that Donald Trump's response to the protesters in Charlottesville was not strong enough. So let's clarify what we're debating about. We're not debating whether or not we like Trump. So it's not going to be a, Trump's a racist, Trump's not. That's not the debate that we're having. Instead, we are debating what the resolution says. Namely, was his response to Charlottesville, as a response, was that response strong enough or not? So the way to understand this, I'm going to give you three separate ways that his response was not strong enough. The first is the hesitation. Our president is someone who responds to breakups on Twitter before the tabloids have enough time to print them and put their magazines in grocery store aisles. The president takes a full 48 hours to come back and condemn Nazism, to condemn racism and bigotry. I mean, it takes even longer to condemn the white supremacists, which were spearheading the whole rally. It's ridiculous. This isn't something controversial like economics where, maybe we have to debate about whether or not we keep minimum wage or not. This is a very simple debate as to whether or not racism and bigotry are going to be supported in America, and Trump takes way too long to explain that. The second key weakness is the inconsistency. This is absolutely crucial. You can like what Trump said in the third response and say that the problem is equal. You can like what he said in the first response and say that it's actually just racism. However, he gives both sides, and that's ridiculous. For a president supposed to lead a nation and come up with a convicted response to describe the crisis and how we should react, he doesn't do that at all. He gives three inconsistent messages. First, he says racism and bigotry are wrong. Then he steps forward and is like, just kidding, it's the white supremacists. And then he's like, just kidding times two, it's actually also this alt-left. They have problems too, and the problem's really just totally equal. So his response is completely inconsistent from the get-go, beyond the fact that it's way too late. Donald Trump is showing up to class late. He's submitting his homework 3 different times in 3 different ways, and we're looking at him asking if we should give him an A? Absolutely not. The third and the final method is his reliance on the teleprompter, I think, indicates this beautifully. He literally looks like he's forced to read a script for the first 2 messages. Then he gets to the third and he's speaking off the cuff and says what he really thinks. So he's turning backwards. He spoke way too late, and he's completely inconsistent. I'd say it's a weak response.
Okay, am I on now? Can you hear me? Okay, good. So every debate I ever have that even involves Trump in any way seems to be like a merging of 2 parallel universes. And it's weird because both sides agree on the basic facts of the case, but they come to 2 completely different conclusions on what those facts mean. So I just want to first go over the facts of the case that we agree with, and then we'll get to our interpretations. So some basic background context. We know what happened in Charlottesville. Then Trump was slated to announce his signing of a new VA bill on veterans' health care and stuff like that. And within that context, he decided to make some remarks about Charlottesville, likely because he was advised to do so. And here's what he said. We're very close. Thank you very much for being here, veterans, blah, blah, blah. But we're closely following the terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, VA. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. This has been going on for a long, long time. It has no place in America. What is vital now is a swift restoration of law and order and the protection of innocent lives. No citizen should ever fear for their safety and security in our society, and no child should ever be afraid to go outside and play or be with their parents and have a good time. He said he just got off the phone with Governor of Virginia, and we agree that the hate and the division must stop and must stop right now. We have to come together as Americans with love for our nation and true, really, I say this so strongly, true affection for each other. Our country is doing very well, blah, 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 record employment. They're coming back to our country. I want to salute the great work of the police, of course. Above all else, we must remember this truth. No matter our color, creed, religion, or political party, we are all Americans first. We love our country. We love our God. We love our flag. We're proud of our country. We're proud of who we are. So we want to get the situation straightened out in Charlottesville, and we want to study it. And we want to see what we're doing as a country where things like this can happen. My administration is restoring the sacred bonds of loyalty between this nation and its citizens. But our citizens must also restore the bonds of trust and loyalty between one another. We must love each other, respect each other, and cherish our history and our future together. So important. We have to respect each other. Ideally, we have to love each other. And that was basically the end of his remarks on. So that's just the most controversial thing, I guess, is that he did not virtue signal enough for the media's liking, and he did not explicitly condemn the KKK and neo-Nazis and white supremacists. And his explanation is that he didn't have all the information yet. So go ahead.
I'm going to have several responses, just the analysis. So my opponent hasn't so far responded to any of the committee. He's just kind of repeated Trump's speech, which we're all familiar with. Let's get into the facts here. First, you can tag 3 responses to the issue of Trump's speech. The first is he doesn't identify the problem. This is the most basic level of, I mean, at any level, if you're going to condemn racism, bigotry, and not even name the people responsible for it, like, are you serious? You're the president, you're the leader of the free world, and you can't even say white supremacists? Now, my opponent's going to say, well, yeah, he actually did say white supremacists. So first, we've already established there's a weakness here. He can't do it right the first time. He can't even do it right the second time because he comes back with a third response. So first, he doesn't identify the problem initially. That's a huge weakness. Second, he undermines it later. He says there's problems on both sides and implies that there's moral equivalence between Hitler sympathy and people who don't like Hitler sympathy, albeit maybe they reacted too far, but to equivalate those two is ridiculous, and it's a huge sign of weakness. The third response is of hesitation. My opponent doesn't even begin to address this. The fact that Donald Trump steps forward and offers a couple of brief, generic platitudes about why, bigotry is wrong, if my opponent's to believe that that's what constitutes a strong response, we've forgotten what leaders are supposed to do. Leaders are supposed to step forward and recognize the urgency of the situation. You look at Bush after 9/11, he doesn't wait a week and be like, oh, by the way, yeah, that whole terrorism thing was kind of sucky. I didn't like it very much. No, he steps forward at the first chance he gets to talk about it. Donald Trump, too, this is one of the biggest issues of national outrage across the country, and he waits a full 48 hours. What was he doing? Playing golf? There's no good excuse for this. So my opponent comes back and just rereads his speech and says, well, he did technically say that it was wrong. The resolution doesn't ask if Donald Trump did anything. It asks if what he did was strong enough. Do you think a leader who gives 3 different conflicting responses that barely grasp the surface of what he should have done, do we really look at Trump and say, well done, buddy, here's your A? Absolutely not.
Is it my turn? Okay, I guess. So we agree that he did explicitly condemn the KKK, neo-Nazis, and everyone of that sort. But I guess the question is kind of ambiguous because you're saying it's not strong enough. That's totally vague. I guess it's not strong enough for the anti-Trump media and people on the left, but it's good enough for his supporters. So it's confusing what you mean by strong enough. To who? Who is it strong enough for? You claim that this is the biggest thing going on in the country, and basically your reasoning for that is because the media says so. But you have to remember, Trump supporters don't watch. They don't believe a damn thing that the mainstream media says. So just because the mainstream media says that this is the most important thing going on in the country does not mean that that's the true and absolute truth. In fact, for example, I'm a veteran. So in my opinion, what he was talking about with the new Veterans Choice, that bill he was signing, that's way more important than what was going on in Charlottesville. More veterans die every single day due to lack of access to health care than the one person who died in Charlottesville. And we have to put this into context. We have to remember that this rise of anti-Trump violence and anti-conservative violence has been going on since Trump started campaigning. Basically, every campaign stop that he's went to has ended in violence. They've been using violence against him. They've been assaulting his supporters, beating them up. Angry mobs of people have simply declared anyone who either attends a Trump rally or even watches a conservative speaker at a university campus, such as Milo Yiannopoulos. That in itself is proof positive that one is a white supremacist or a neo-Nazi. And it's funny to me because like I actively attend events of that I don't agree with. Like I go to Tea Party rallies, I've been to the Occupy protests, I've been to anti-Trump rallies, things like that. And it doesn't mean that I agree with these views. I'm just trying to listen to them. And so what the left has done is basically decided anyone who even attends these events are all neo-Nazis and they're all white supremacists, every single one of them. And therefore it's okay. You can punch a Nazi, so to speak, and that's totally fine. And the normalization of political violence against conservatives is it's a real threat. You know, it's not surprising to me that there is some pushback by conservatives. The KKK holds a rally in Charlottesville every single year. Why is it that only this one has led to violence? I'll tell you, it's because of the normalization of political violence on the left that has occurred since Trump started campaigning, and it's terrible.
Okay, so my opponent's only argument for the resolution, which is barely an argument, is his first question about what constitutes something being strong enough. That's currently the only argument he has here. So he says, well, that's a little vague. Okay, just scroll up. The resolution is literally right there. It says Trump's response to the protesters in Charlottesville was not strong enough. So my opponent being like quizzical, like, what is this? It's part of the resolution that we've known about for days. So let's not make up excuses now and pretend that we haven't had it to debate. Aside from that, my opponent says it's a little vague. Okay, we're talking about Hitler sympathy. We're talking about people stepping forward with loaded semi-automatic rifles, chanting racist slurs. Like how hard of a layup is it for Trump to step forward and be like, we unequivocally condemn white supremacists and Nazis and all of them are bad. That's the argument. I can't respond to what you're writing on the paper. You're just going to have to give it in the speech. So first, this is what the resolution says. My opponent says that's a little vague. Yeah, it'd be vague if it was like Occupy Wall Street. If it was like, yeah, there's some legitimate debate here as to whether or not we should have or not have minimum wage. This is not controversial. This is racism is bad. It's functionally all we need to do is just explain that white supremacists are evil to completely disavow them. I want to remind you, by the way, there was a report from The Independent that was published 2 days after the rallies, and the article documents how white supremacists and neo-Nazis are actually celebrating Trump's response. Literally, the disagreement here that my opponent is offering you is proving my point. For any person to stand up and give a strong response to neo-Nazis and white supremacists is effortless. It's not hard work. All you have to do is to disavow them and condemn them completely. But Trump waits forever to do this, the hesitation argument. He then gives different messages that are completely inconsistent and doesn't disavow them until way later down the road. So look, all of the arguments my opponent gives afterward, he complains about the media. He complains about Milo. He says, well, look at me. I'm a great guy. I go to free speech rallies. You know, the media is anti-conservative, and also they normalize violence. None of these arguments have anything to do with the debate. You can scratch them off your piece of paper. They're utterly unimportant, and we don't even need to respond to them. They don't interact with the statement, the resolution, that Trump's response was not strong enough. So ask yourself this question. We'll come back to the same arguments my opponent refuses to respond to. Is a 2-day late response to Hitler sympathy, violence, and domestic terrorism that gives 3 different responses over the course of a couple days, at the end ultimately sympathizing and equalizing the violence of the alt-left with Hitler sympathy. Do you feel like that's a strong response for a leader? This is not a hard question.
Oh, yeah. So there's 2 separate realities that exist in this country. One is the left that believes in something called virtue signaling, where this is very unique to a lot of white people, and from my experience, is that they have to make sure that everyone knows for sure that you're not a racist, and you have to immediately distance yourself from racists. I've never had that problem because I have brown skin, so I don't really feel like I have to prove that I'm not a racist. I know I'm not racist, so I don't have to, I'm not like how white people are, where they have to immediately distance themselves from even the perception of being racist. So I believe that you guys are basically trying to apply this standard to Trump, and Trump and his supporters reject that view. Trump knows he's not a racist. His supporters know he's not racist. He did, in fact, condemn the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, but he didn't do it fast enough, according to this undefined standard that the media has made up. They said, oh, he didn't do it quick enough, or he didn't explicitly condemn the KKK and neo-Nazis the first time, so he did the second time, but that wasn't good enough, apparently. And I'm actually glad that Trump is condemning the violence on the left. And we have to admit, in the last year, most of the political violence has been coming from the left, and it's been normalized by the media. So I'm actually glad that the president, for the first time, is actually saying something about this and bringing it to everyone's attention, while the fake news mainstream media is trying to make it all. They're trying to craft this narrative that Donald Trump is a racist, and therefore anything he says must be taken in that light. You have to remember, he completely disavowed them a very long time ago. He disavowed the alt-right, the KKK, any kind of white supremacy. But no matter how many times he does that, that is never going to be enough for the talking heads on the news, people on the left, the anti-Trump media in general, and people on the left. No matter what Trump says, it's not going to be enough for the left. I'll give you an example of something else that happened. So we've went from punching Nazis to assassinating congressmen. Here's Trump's response to that. We are deeply saddened by this tragedy. Our thoughts and prayers are with members of Congress, their staff, Capitol Police, first responders, and all others affected. This is after some crazy person, some Bernie supporter, went and shot a bunch of Republicans playing a baseball game. Was that strong enough? I don't know. Should he have said more about that? It didn't seem like he had that much to say about it. And then I could read Bernie's quote if you give me more time. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't have. I'll just pass the mic.
It's worth everyone watching to kind of step back and observe what's happening. My opponent's generic arguments, his complaints about the media, none of these are coming even close to proving the resolution true. This discussion is not just a random bantering to see who can rack up the most political points. It is a proof of the resolution, which is the thing we're supposed to debate. My opponent's complaints about the media have almost zero impact to it. Now, I'm still going to go line by line and like my opponent actually address the things he said. First, he talks about virtue signaling, and he's like, yeah, it's kind of cool. Trump doesn't feel a need to disavow himself from stuff like racism and bigotry. Can we just recognize how much of an assault on morality this is? To say, yeah, Trump's really unique in the fact that he doesn't feel the need to espouse basic ethics of how we should treat other people. Isn't that neat? No, I think that's horrifying. You look at literally any other leader who's looking at terrorism, they're going to immediately condemn the terrorists and say, this is a terrible thing that's happening. We need to get help to other people as soon as possible. My opponent's looking at Donald Trump, who's borderline sympathizing with white supremacists, neo-Confederates, and neo-Nazis, and it's like, yeah, it's kind of neat how he sticks it to the media by not saying the things that are the most basic ethical things he should. So my opponent's arguments are not needing to disavow. The best response here is just, it's the president's responsibility to disavow evil. You have a crisis break out on your turf, in your homeland, you better do something about it. You watch terrorism go down in your borders, you better say something about it. You better have a response. The ends of most of my opponent's arguments, by the way, are really that Trump shouldn't have responded at all. His whines about the media saying, well, the media kind of is hard on him. I don't care if the media is hard on him. Regardless of anything else that happens, were this the only moment that Trump had in his presidency so far, it is a weak response. It comes 2 days too late. It is full of inconsistencies. He's relying on a teleprompter, looking like he's forced to read a script. I mean, is my opponent really looking at the speech and is like, yeah, what a strong message that he gave 3 different ways, 3 different times, 2 days late, and then ended up sympathizing with the people who he should have been condemning the whole time? Are we literally going to pretend that this is even remotely close to what it should have been? I'm also going to turn the last argument. I'm really glad my opponent decides to bring up, this position is totally irrelevant, that most political violence is not on the right. I just want to fact check my opponent. Actually, you are twice as likely to be killed by a right-wing extremist as you are a Muslim terrorist. Over the past 5 years, the numbers of the amount of terrorism and deaths from right-wingers has gone way up. Not classic right-wingers, not just your grandpa who's kind of conservative. I mean right-wing extremists. That number has gone up tremendously. Once you factor out the 2 anomalies, 9/11 as well as the Oklahoma City bombing, you are twice as likely to be killed by a right-wing extremist. So right-wing extremism is plenty violent. They've killed tons of people. We had an act that Attorney General Jeff Sessions literally calls an act of domestic terrorism with someone ramming their car into a crowd. My opponent's going to pretend like this doesn't matter, like it was just a kind of a rally. People died. So let's have some seriousness and recognize that Donald Trump utterly failed in saying that it was a problem.
Okay, to the last part, the political violence over the last year is definitely unique to the left. It's not conservatives who are showing up to progressive speaker events and, you know, Democratic Party events, and shutting them down and rioting and beating up and mobbing the attendees there. It's invariably conservative speakers or a Donald Trump rally where people are being assaulted. So actually, that is going after conservatives. Charlottesville is a great example of that. They had a permit to be there. And every single rally that they've had prior to that did not end in violence. The KKK always goes to Charlottesville. What's new is the normalization of political violence on the left. Recently, this year, or maybe last year, in San Jose, 10 people were stabbed at a KKK rally because the left has determined that the KKK and other people that they disagree with do not have a right to free speech. And the violence, the normalization of political violence is epidemic in this country at this point. So let's get back to the actual statement that Trump made, which according to you is not enough. To anyone who acted criminally in this weekend's racist violence, you will be held fully accountable. Justice will be delivered. As I said on Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. We must love each other, show affection for each other, and unite together in condemnation of hatred, bigotry, and violence. We must rediscover the bonds of love and loyalty that bring us together as Americans. Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. Now, apparently that wasn't, you know, good enough for you and others. He didn't say it fast enough because all the facts weren't there. But you have no real response in light of his comments on other kinds of political violence, such as congressmen being assassinated on a baseball field. He didn't have much to say about that. Here's what Bernie had to say about that. One of his supporters attempted to assassinate several congressmen. Well, here, hang on. I have just been informed that the alleged shooter at the Republican baseball practice is someone who apparently volunteered on my presidential campaign. I am sickened by this despicable act. Let me be as clear as I can be. Violence of any kind, oh, is he equivocating now, is unacceptable in our society, and I condemn this action in the strongest possible terms. Real change can only come through nonviolent action. So basically a canned statement, just like Trump delivered. And there's no controversy over that. Was that strong enough? Was his statement strong enough on the baseball shooting? I don't know. It's a very vague and ambiguous standard.
Okay, we need to clarify arguments that do matter and arguments that don't matter. Arguments about other speakers at other events have nothing to do with whether or not his response to Charlottesville was weak. So every time my opponent comes back and tries to persuade you as the voters to care about what Bernie said or what Bernie didn't say, look, we have a resolution for a reason. It's not just a random springboard that we can use to find another discussion. The goal of this debate is to talk about the resolution. So I don't give a rip about what other people said at baseball games. That's not what I'm analyzing. I'm here analyzing Trump's response to Charlottesville. Look, my opponent has basically one argument here. And he's like, well, you know, the media is kind of hard on him because, you know, all the facts weren't there. Two responses. First, the facts have been in about racism and Hitler sympathy for a long time, and they are that it is evil. This isn't controversial. I want you to extend the argument about Occupy Wall Street. Look, if this was like minimum wage versus no minimum wage, I could understand some hesitance. This is like freaking people with weapons threatening others, you know, holding racist signs and posters. There's zero excuse to wait this long. The fact that there's such a national outrage about this too, my opponent thinks it's like, you know, kind of lame for there to be a national outrage. I don't really care. All I care is in a democratic system where the leader's supposed to represent their people, you would think Donald Trump would maybe represent the outrage and respond a little bit sooner, right? We have a dead person, we have domestic terrorism, we have, you know, reverence for one of the most evil ideologies of the 20th century. My opponent's over here like, yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, he should be able to wait as long as he wants. No big deal. It's ridiculous. All of the arguments come back to is this. Was his response strong enough or not strong enough? My opponent has made zero offensive arguments about how it was strong. He's literally spent most of his time rereading the words of the speech, not even giving an argument on them. He's just kind of like, well, yeah, that's the thing he said. So I want to come down to the main issues. First, the facts were in about racism for a long time, not just after, you know, the planned attack happened. The second thing we should remember is that Charlottesville was premeditated. It wasn't like a national disaster. He was like, oh shit, let me run over and like make sure this is okay. No. People knew about the rally for weeks. It was planned. So Trump knew this was going to happen and still takes 2 days. Totally unreasonable. Let's get back to the two biggest arguments. The first is hesitation. Trump takes 2 days and doesn't respond to the thing he absolutely needs to respond to. The second big issue is inconsistency. Now, this is what's super critical. You can be my opponent and you can like the thing that Donald Trump says at the end, where he actually calls out leftist violence. I like that too. I think it's great. However, the key issue is it's not strong, because he starts by saying racism is bad. Then he jumps over and is like, oh, by the way, actually the white supremacists are the problem. And then is like, just kidding. There's kind of problems on both sides. It doesn't matter which of those 3 speeches you liked. The fact that he had to give 3 speeches that were all different from each other is a huge sign of weakness. You can be the biggest Trump fan in this room, but you're never going to look at that speech and be like, wow, what a stellar example of strength, because it was 3 different speeches at 3 different times.
Well, once again, my opponent is again using this arbitrary standard of strong enough. So I have a simple question: how can we determine whether something is strong enough without comparing it to other statements based on other similar events? What are we comparing the strength of Donald Trump's statements to exactly? He made 3 statements. I think that's enough. He condemned all of them explicitly by name, and he also condemned them explicitly by name before these events even occurred. These events had not even occurred yet, and he had already explicitly denounced the KKK, the alt-right, the white supremacists. So, I mean, I don't what exactly would a strong response be? Did he not? What should he have said? I mean, because I've quoted for you his statements. And apparently that's not, condemning them explicitly by name is not enough. Condemning violence, saying we need to love each other, that's not enough for you. So I'm wondering, what is strong enough? Like, what exactly would constitute being strong enough? I've read you a quote from Bernie Sanders, his remarks on one of his supporters shooting several congressmen. I don't know if that's strong enough. To me, it is. I mean, he condemns them. He condemns the guy explicitly. That's what Trump did. He condemned the guy who ran over the people. So what more do you want? He gave 3 statements on the issue. You said it didn't happen fast enough. He didn't have all the facts. You have no idea. You're pretending, and the media is too, that you know for sure what happened when the guy, like he ran them over because he hated them and he wanted to kill them. You don't actually know that. It could be that they were assaulting his car or something, or refusing to get out of the way. Maybe he felt like his life was threatened. You don't actually know the facts. You are just speculating. You have no idea what actually happened there, and neither does Trump. What we do know for sure is that, once again, free speech is being attacked in this country by violent mobs on the left. The KKK, white supremacists, neo-Nazis have an absolute right to free speech in this country. They have an absolute right to be rallying and protesting the removal of Confederate statues, which, by the way, most Americans support leaving those statues. I want to reiterate that fact. Most Americans support leaving these statues. So, I don't know, you're making up this arbitrary standard saying that it wasn't strong enough, but I've given you examples of him explicitly condemning these things before the events even occurred, and then 2 days after, and then again the next day, and then again the next day. But that is just basically nothing that Trump ever does or says will be enough for you guys. You're just going to find some way to say, well, this was not enough.
It's interesting that my opponent uses the phrase, what more Trump? And my answer is very simple. Well, let me repeat that. I think I got cut off. My opponent keeps saying, what more do you want from Donald Trump? And what I've tried to illustrate is that I don't want more. Less is more when it comes to responding to a crisis about racism and bigotry. I want one unequivocal response that gives a complete condemnation of the groups involved with Hitler sympathy. That's not that hard to ask. To give 3 different responses at 3 different times that are all different from each other is incredibly weak. So my opponent asking that, claiming I want more from Trump, he's totally misconstruing the argument. The problem is that he gives 3 different responses. Imagine like Timmy showing up late to class like Trump did, and then submitting 3 different papers for his English assignment. Then look at his teacher like, well, what more? Do you want a 4th one? It's like, Timmy, no. If you had literally read the rules and not been so silly, you would have realized that one submission that is correct is all we ever wanted from you, and Trump completely fails at doing that.
Hey, you should warn me before you pass the mic. You're holding him to a double standard. That's all.
I would like to respond to double standard by comparing this to literally every crisis response ever. I mean, look at Bush after 9/11. He doesn't give 3 responses saying, you know, there are some problems with non-extremists in the United States, and, you know, there's fine people on both sides. He doesn't give 3 separate responses to it. The arbitrary standard is not arbitrary. He keeps claiming it is. We want a basic level of conviction and urgency from a president leading the free world who just experienced a national crisis.